There is a reason why true love rarely feels romantic at first, and there is a reason why, when it appears, your ego panics. Most people grow up believing that love should feel safe, comforting, validating, something that confirms who they already think they are. But Carl Jung warned us about this illusion. He believed that the most powerful encounters in life are not the ones that soothe the ego, but the ones that threaten it. True love is not an emotional reward. It is a psychological event. And that is why, when you meet it, something strange happens inside you. Instead of excitement, you may feel fear. Instead of certainty, confusion. Instead of control, a deep sense of exposure. Not because something is wrong, but because something profoundly real has entered your life. The first scaring sign that you've met true love is this: you feel emotionally naked without choosing to be. Around this person, your usual defenses fail. Your humor doesn't protect you. Your intelligence doesn't give you distance. Your achievements don't create superiority. You are seen, not just the version you perform for the world, but the parts you rarely allow yourself to look at. And this is terrifying for the ego. The ego survives by controlling the image. It wants to curate how you are perceived, what is revealed, what is hidden. But true love bypasses this entire mechanism. It does not ask permission. It sees through the mask before you even realize you are wearing one. This is why many people say things like, "I don't know why, but I feel exposed around them. I feel like they see too much. I feel vulnerable in a way I can't explain." Jung would say, this is not coincidence. This is the psyche recognizing someone who mirrors your unconscious, someone who activates parts of you that have been sleeping, avoided, or repressed. And the ego does not like this, because when you are emotionally naked, you cannot pretend, you cannot manipulate, you cannot hide behind personas. You are forced into authenticity. And authenticity feels like danger to a mind built on protection. That is why many people run at this stage. They confuse emotional exposure with incompatibility. They confuse vulnerability with weakness. They say, something feels off, when in reality, something feels too real. But here is the truth most people never hear. True love doesn't feel safe to the ego. It feels destabilizing. It challenges the identity you constructed to survive. It questions your narratives. It disrupts your emotional habits. And most frightening of all, it invites you to grow, not someday, now. If you've ever felt this kind of exposure with someone, a sense that you couldn't hide even if you wanted to, that experience deserves reflection, not dismissal. So let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, not for me, but for yourself. Have you ever met someone who made you feel seen in a way that scared you? If this resonates, pause for a moment and comment this phrase below. It's important. Real love exposes what the ego tries to hide. The second scaring sign that you've met true love is not romantic at all. In fact, most people experience it as discomfort. True love disrupts your self-image. Carl Jung believed that every person carries a carefully constructed identity, a story about who they are, why they act the way they do, and what they deserve. This identity is not fully false, but it is incomplete. It exists to keep the psyche stable, predictable, and socially acceptable. And then true love enters. Instead of reinforcing your self-image, this person quietly challenges it. Not through criticism, not through conflict, but simply by existing in your life. Around them, you begin to notice patterns you never questioned before. Emotional habits, defense mechanisms, excuses you've been calling personality. You start seeing where you avoid responsibility, where you seek control, where you retreat instead of grow. And this is deeply unsettling. The ego wants consistency. It wants to believe this is who I am, and this is how the world works. But true love introduces a mirror, one that reflects not only your strengths, but also your contradictions. You may suddenly feel things like, I don't like who I am when I'm with this person. They make me question myself. I feel uncomfortable, but I don't know why. This discomfort is not a sign of incompatibility. It is a sign of individuation. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the self. And true love accelerates this process violently. It forces growth where comfort once lived. The ego interprets this as threat, because growth means loss. Loss of old identities, loss of emotional shortcuts, loss of illusions that once kept you safe. That's why the ego often reacts with resistance instead of gratitude. It whispers excuses. This is too intense. I was happier before. This shouldn't feel this hard. But depth has never been easy. True love does not ask you to abandon yourself. It asks you to meet yourself honestly. And honesty feels like pressure when you've been living in partial awareness. Many people sabotage real love at this stage. They choose familiarity over truth. They choose comfort over transformation. They walk away, not because love was missing, but because the ego could not survive unchanged. Here's the uncomfortable reality. If someone makes you confront parts of yourself you've been avoiding, they are not your enemy. They may be your catalyst, and catalysts are rarely pleasant. So pause here. Reflect, not emotionally but psychologically. Has someone ever made you question who you thought you were? If this part resonates, comment this phrase below. It anchors awareness. Growth feels like loss before it feels like freedom. The third scaring sign is the one the ego resists the most, because it strikes at its core addiction. True love makes you lose control, and you feel it immediately, not in a dramatic way, not through chaos or instability, but through something far more disturbing to the ego: emotional surrender. With most relationships, control is subtle but constant. You control what you say, you control how much you reveal, you control the pace, the distance, the version of yourself you offer. Even vulnerability in many cases is carefully managed, but true love dissolves this structure. You notice that you cannot calculate your reactions. You cannot predict how deeply something affects you. You cannot maintain the same emotional leverage you're used to having. Their presence alone alters your internal state, and that terrifies the ego. Why? Because the ego equates control with safety. When you begin to care without strategy, when your emotions move faster than your intellect, when you realize that losing them would genuinely hurt, the ego sounds the alarm. This is when thoughts like these appear. I'm too invested. I don't like how much power this has over me. I feel out of control. But what the ego calls danger, the psyche calls connection. Jung understood that control is often a compensation for fear. We control because we are afraid of loss, abandonment, humiliation, or dependency. And true love threatens all of these illusions at once, not because it wants to destroy you, but because it asks you to trust. And trust is unbearable for an ego trained in self-protection. This is why many people suddenly become distant right when the bond deepens. They intellectualize, they withdraw, they sabotage intimacy with logic, not because love faded, but because control slipped. Here is the paradox few people grasp. True love doesn't take your power away. It exposes the false power you were holding on to. The power of emotional detachment, the power of indifference, the power of always having an exit. And when those dissolve, you feel naked again. But this time, not emotionally, existentially. You are faced with a choice: to remain in control and emotionally alone, or to risk vulnerability and become real. Most people choose control, not consciously, but reflexively. They tell themselves stories about timing, compatibility, or not being ready. But beneath those narratives lives one truth. The ego could not negotiate the loss of dominance. If you have ever felt the urge to pull away precisely when something meaningful was forming, not because of conflict but because of intensity, this is not coincidence. It is the psyche reacting to depth. So take a moment. Be honest with yourself. Has there ever been someone who made you feel like you were losing control, and instead of leaning in, you stepped back? If this resonates, comment this phrase below. Let it anchor the insight. The ego fears love because it can't control it. When you place the three signs together, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. True love exposes you. True love dismantles your self-image. True love takes away the illusion of control. And none of this feels pleasant to the ego. This is why so many people say they want deep love, yet unconsciously choose relationships that never threaten them. Relationships where nothing essential is challenged, where familiarity replaces truth, where emotional comfort replaces psychological growth. Carl Jung understood something most modern conversations about love avoid. Love is not meant to protect the ego. It is meant to transform the self. These three scaring signs are not red flags. They are initiation points. They mark the moment when love stops being fantasy and becomes reality. And reality, when it arrives, is rarely gentle. It demands participation, responsibility, presence, courage. That is why true love feels heavy at first, not because it is wrong, but because it is real. The ego wants pleasure without risk. The psyche seeks meaning, even if it hurts. And here is the hardest truth of all. You don't lose true love by being vulnerable. You lose it by retreating into protection. Most people don't fail in love because they cared too much. They fail because they refuse to grow. They misinterpret fear as intuition. They misinterpret discomfort as incompatibility. They misinterpret depth as danger. And so they walk away, not from the other person, but from the version of themselves that was trying to emerge. Jung would say that when you meet true love, you are not just meeting another person. You are meeting an unexpressed future self, one that requires you to integrate what you've been avoiding. That is why the ego fights so hard. Because if you accept this love, you cannot remain the same. You cannot hide behind old narratives. You cannot repeat unconscious patterns. You cannot live on emotional autopilot. True love demands consciousness, and consciousness is always uncomfortable before it is liberating. So if you recognize these signs, emotional exposure, identity disruption, loss of control, don't rush to label them as problems. Sit with them, reflect on them. Ask yourself not, is this easy? But, is this asking me to become more real? Because love that doesn't challenge you will never transform you, and love that transforms you will never feel safe to the ego. It will feel like risk, like surrender, like truth. And truth has always been terrifying to what is false. Before you leave this reflection, I want you to anchor it, not intellectually, but consciously. If this series resonated with you, comment this final phrase below. True love doesn't comfort the ego. It awakens the soul. If you found yourself thinking of someone while listening to this, if something inside you felt recognized rather than entertained, that wasn't coincidence. That was awareness knocking. And whether you answer it or silence it, is the quiet decision that shapes every relationship you'll ever have.